So I wanted to do a quick overview, setting up a document for starting your work. So when you open up Illustrator, if you don't already have a file open, you'll kind of be presented with a splash page like this. And this is just showing you kind of previous projects that you might have been working on. Conveniently down here, there's some video tutorials that you could link to. But I'm going to show you how to set up a new document. So we could click here on the new button icon right here, or we could actually come up to the file menu and do new. So after I'm done doing that, I'm presented with this dialog box for creating a new document. Now, a couple things to notice up here that are new to Illustrator CC. We have some preset categories for the kind of document that we're making. Let's say we're doing a project where we're making graphics for mobile devices. There's already a preset here that I could click and it's going to change the rest of these settings accordingly. I could also work on something for web or print, film and video, and general art and illustration. I'm just going to go ahead and choose the print setting. And over here we can see we could name the file, and then below that we could set the dimensions of the artboard. Anytime you create a file, you have to have at least one artboard. One thing to know is my dimensions right now are in points. And that's usually like a typography setting. I'm going to go ahead and change this. And if I toggle this open, we can see that there's many different metrics we could use for our dimensions. So we could use picas, we could use inches, millimeters, centimeters, and even pixels. I'm going to go ahead and choose inches because that's what most people are familiar with. And you can see here that I have just a standard width of 8.5 and a height of 11. That's standard paper size. You can see over here says blank document presets. It already has this preset available to us, so that's the letter size. Went ahead and clicked over here to the A4. Okay, we could see that the dimensions change. It also defaulted back to the points metric, but if I go and choose inches, I can see that it reflects a little bit of a different dimension than the letter size. I could also do legal and tabloid size. And once again, I can always come in here and I can just change how it's interpreting the measurements on that. Below that, we have the orientation. Right now I have it at 11 by 17, but I could change the orientation from a horizontal to a vertical landscape and vice versa. And then to the right of that is our artboards. So that's the number of those white rectangular boards that we do our artwork on. This is essentially the printable area or the pages of a PDF that we work on. So below that is the bleed. So bleed usually relates to printing. This is the amount of area that goes outside of the artboard that can be recognized for printing. You can go in here and you can actually just start toggling up on these numbers, and it usually goes in increments of 1/8 of an inch. So I could come in here and I could set this as 0.25 and then click outside of the box, and automatically the rest of the top, bottom, and left and right bleed change with that. That's because it's all linked together. This is the icon for linking those all together. So once you scale one of these, so if I were to change this to 0.5 and then click outside, the rest of those would change. If I wanted to customize this, I could click on that link. Okay, I would break the link to that. And then if I were to come in here to the top bleed and change this to 0.25, click outside, now they are not linked together, and so just the top bleed is affected. So below the bleed is the type of color mode that we're using on our document. So by default, since I'm working in print, the color mode is CMYK. If I were to come over here, click on the mobile setting, we can see the color mode is changing. Okay, now we're in RGB color. RGB is the universal color mode for any kind of digital interface or screen interface. Whereas the print interfaces, most likely, if the final output is in print, you're working in CMYK color. I could change that. I could go against the kind of default settings and it gives me a little warning. It says the chosen color is a different mode from the color space defined by the document profile. You can customize even standard letter print document to be RGB color. Just know that by default it's trying to help you in working with your final destination. I'll just go ahead and keep it as one artboard and then I'll hit create. And so now that I've created my document, you can see here that it is in the horizontal landscape format. If I hit Command and R, I can activate my rulers. And if you look up here, you can see the size of this artboard. We're going from 0 all the way to 11 inches here, and from here we're going from 0 down to 8.5. So this is the correct setup that I was going for. So if you followed along with me, go ahead and start playing around, start choosing some of these tools. I'd recommend the drawing tools, so these top 6 tools up here. So just start playing around with some of these tools up here in the tool panel, and just see what you can create. And if you get lost, it's okay. We'll just close the document. So I went ahead and created a few shapes and created a little composition, and now I want to look to save my document. There's a few ways we could do that. If I try to come up here to my tab, which is showing me the current file that I'm working with, it's untitled. If I go ahead to the close icon and try to close it, by default it will ask me, do I want to save? I'm just going to cancel that, and I'm going to come up to File and Save, and just like all our other files, we can choose where we want to save it to. For most of your working files, you need to keep it as Adobe Illustrator, but when you upload your files to as an assignment or to show other people, you usually want to change the type of file it is so that it's smaller and easier to read, and for that you're going to use Adobe PDF. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as Adobe PDF and hit the Save button, and then it's going to ask me, how do you want to save this PDF? For most of your files that you're going to be showing either to the instructor or to other students, you want to save this as a small file size. So right here, Adobe PDF preset, and we want to save it as small file size. But just know when you save it in this version, you can't edit it, and it's usually best for viewing across all kinds of platforms. So I'm going to go ahead and save PDF. Okay, the other way I can save this file is just as an AI, so I'll just say File, Save As, and I'll change this back to an Adobe Illustrator file and click Save. And depending on what version of Illustrator you're working with, you want to pay attention to this drop-down menu. So I happen to work in Adobe Creative Suite, which is the newest version of Illustrator, but some of you might have older versions of Illustrator. If you are working with, let's say, CS5 or CS6, you want to save it to the oldest version of Illustrator that you have. That's because the newest versions of Illustrator can usually always read the older versions, but the older versions cannot always read the newer versions. Just try to remember, always save it as the oldest version of Illustrator that you're working with. So I'm going to go ahead and change that back to Illustrator CC. Okay, and all of this I want to keep as just default, and I'll click OK. Okay, so one final thing I want to show you guys when you guys are working on your files, you want to get really handy with having your hand over the Command and the S key. So if I hit Command S, it automatically saves the file to the last version I saved it as. In this case, I saved it as an AI file. Just be really handy with hitting the Command S key and saving your work frequently. I would recommend saving your work every 5 minutes, just hovering your hand over the Command S. And so there you have it, just a general overview of creating a new document, changing the settings in that document, and then also saving your document.